Hey,
All
y'all.
right. Okay, we back. Part 2.
Welcome to part 2 of episode 1 of season 3 of Wokeland. Yes. And so part 1, we were just shooting the shit, getting back acclimated with y'all and talking about like where we were in 2020, where we are now in 2021, what's been going on in the world, what's coming up on the season. This episode, or this second part, we're going to zoom in a bit and talk more so about where we went and where some of us went during this panini. So we have a special guest today. Yay. So we have Anitra here joining us. She's an Oakland native, the brand and brains behind Don't Trip Travel. It's a brand helping women, travel the world and explore life while having a 9-to-5, because that could be a struggle. Okay. And she's also a public health professional. So Anitra, do you want to add anything? Did I get you right?
No, you covered it. Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Yay.
Happy to have you.
Happy to have you. And yeah, Anitra is a traveler. And, during this pandemic, travel was a controversial topic. Okay. It was very controversial. It was like the US was the hub of the pandemic for pretty much the entire time the pandemic was happening. Like it was like the US and maybe Italy and maybe certain parts of Asia that were going through it, and you could not leave. Like if you left, it was like a whole thing, and there was judgment and stuff happening if people traveled, but there was also reason for people to travel and be near their families. So we're going to talk about it on this episode, about basically the Black people who left and the Black people who stayed, and why we made those choices in the past year.
Right. And I, for me, who as a Black person who didn't leave, I really want to pick both of your brains about what really pushed that decision. Yeah. Now, for you, you've traveled the world. I think on your blog, it says you've been to 60 countries.
No, over 30 countries.
Over 30 countries. Okay. It's going to be 60 soon. It's going to be 60. It's going to be 60 countries soon. All right.
I'm getting their goals.
Yes.
Travel goals.
Over 30 countries.
Yes.
Across how many continents?
6 continents.
Across 6 continents. So first, let's maybe start there. So why travel? What does traveling mean to you? And then I'll ask about what your traveling was like, or the lack thereof, during the pandemic.
Yeah, such an important question. Yeah, travel is such a big part of my life. And initially, I feel like I started traveling because I wanted to see the world, and I feel like the world needed to see me.
Ooh, the world needs to see you.
That's
girl.
a bar.
Yes, that's a bar. Right.
Yes, and I think initially just got the travel bug. Really wanted to go and explore the world and see just different places and learn and interact with different people from different cultures. That really drove a lot of my travel. But then I think over the years, it sort of evolved and started to be about self-care and leaving the United States as a form of self-care.
Yeah.
So that's been sort of a big part of my travel, and part of why I have traveled so much. Part of it is really self-care and self-sustainability, and leaving U.S. soil as a part of just like taking off a lot of the sort of heaviness that comes with being a Black woman in America, and just a level of freedom and curiosity and openness that comes with being in different parts of the world. So that's sort of, I think what sort of inspires me to continue to travel, and why travel has continued to remain a big part of my life.
Wow. And so you seem to have identified that like pre-COVID, where I feel like a lot of Black people identified that during COVID. Yeah. And so did you travel during season 1 or season 2 of the pandemic?
Season 1, season 2 of the pandemic. I love that. So for me, initially, when the pandemic hit, actually that weekend, I was traveling that weekend that the sort of world march.
That March, like 13th or something.
I literally was coming back to California when they announced like California is going into lockdown. And I literally had just made it back.
From where?
I was traveling from Texas at the time, so not from an international trip. But I made a decision when the pandemic hit to just, initially, let me back up. So initially, when the first, at the beginning, when it was very new and it was sort of raging in China, and I think in Italy, it felt like, okay, not really sure what's going on in the world. While we're remote, I'm just going to book a trip to St. Martin. Like, why not? Right?
Just St. Martin.
She said, I'm just
gonna go.
Yeah.
Let me just go to this island.
Right. Before we get back in the office.
Right.
Exactly. Before I knew the severity of, like, before it actually, like, touched down on U.S. soil, and it became very real when our government was very just sort of nonchalant about taking the pandemic, taking the crisis and the virus serious. So initially at the top of the pandemic, I felt like, okay, let me just, I'm going to book the trip. I'm going to go. And then I think it hit me like a month in. So I think by when the entire world shut down, that's when I was like, okay, everything is grounded. Like I need to cancel all my trips. I had so many trips planned that I actually canceled. And then at that point, I made a decision, like, I'm not going to travel, because after really looking at the data and seeing how the virus was, like, disproportionately impacting communities of color, particularly Black and brown communities. And because I have a public health background, I was able to see and read into that a little bit differently. It hit differently in hearing that, like, emergency rooms are full. Like, and that sort of made me think, like, I should probably stay home. I am actually going to make a choice to stay home. And part of that decision was I don't want to get anyone else sick. It was like I don't want to cause harm or bring the virus or transmute the virus to a different place.
Okay. That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the most part, I did not. I didn't travel for most of the pandemic, for I guess season 1 of the pandemic. Right? And then after, I think once vaccines started to roll out, I felt like I had a different level of comfort with leaving. And I think also you have to think about the year of 2020, right? Like I felt like it was a very challenging and historic year, to say the least. Like the racial uprisings, like the natural disasters that were happening around the world and in the country, the wildfires here in California. I just felt so exhausted and depleted.
Exhausted is the word. Exhausted is the word. Still exhausted.
Yeah, still exhausted.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And you're an Oakland native.
Yes.
So we were talking in the first part of this episode about just like how Oakland reached this point of like, wow, I can no longer, like, it almost felt like we were suffocating here, just because like the streets were like completely and constantly in an unrest. How is that for you, like as an Oakland native, where like this is your home? So if you were to leave, like, and maybe like go back home, you're here in Oakland. So
yeah, I'd say for me with the racial uprisings, I was not surprised to see people in the streets every day protesting because of the sort of social justice roots in Oakland. My family have deep roots in West Oakland, and I've been there for over 60 years. And so for me, I was not necessarily surprised, but it definitely weighed on me. Yeah. You know what I mean? To see people, and I was also very encouraged to see so many young people putting their bodies on the line, literally, in a fight around racial equality. So I had never seen anything like that in my lifetime. It just took me back to what it must have been like to be alive during the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
literally.
That just gave me goosebumps. Yeah. I mean, and we depend on Oakland to rise up. You know what I mean? In times like this,
we always do.
We always do, and we should.
Yeah.
It just was exhausting.
It could be exhausting.
It was a lot to take in.
Yeah,
absolutely. And racial trauma is real, right? Like that is very real. I feel like I had more white coworkers and friends like reach out to me than ever before, asking me how I was doing. I'm just like, wow. Yeah, right. It almost felt like Black people had just come out.
I know, like, okay, y'all just found out about us. Okay, cool.
But would you have preferred that nobody, like none of your white colleagues and none of your white friends said anything? Would you have preferred that like extreme?
That's a really good question.
That is a good question. It's like one of those like rock and like it's like the what's the lesser of two like evils or fucked up situations. It's just like if y'all didn't say anything, now I'm looking at y'all like, wow, so you are just immune to like my pain, my community suffering, and like what's going on. Like this clearly, like you have decided that this has nothing to do with you. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, well now y'all are all up in my face out of nowhere, and before you never cared about any of this and never came to me, and now you are, and it just seems so disingenuous. I don't know what I don't know what I don't know for you like what the response I would have expected or been happy with.
No, that definitely resonates. It felt like a lot of white folks were having a sort of crisis of purpose in terms of like, I don't really know what to do. I realized that, racial trauma is real and I should do something. I'm not really sure what that is. I'm going to make contact. And so I think in that way, it felt nice to see white people sort of acknowledge like the moment that we were in time in history, and to reach out and to just, and sort of sit with their own discomfort around what this means for them. And to me, I'm like, it's action, right? Like, how are you going to then action or a solution on this?
Yeah. Wow. And then, okay, so going back to season 1 of the pandemic. Okay, so everything hit. You was about to dip off to St. Martin, but then you realized, no, let me stay here, shouty.
Right.
Like, I guess as a public health professional, like, what were you thinking? Like, you're a traveler, but you're also a public health professional, and this is a public health crisis. Like, why did you decide to stay? Was it that public health, like knowing like the inner workings of how bad the virus was? Like, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a part of it was seeing the high death rates that was happening in my community and in communities of color. And then for me, and particularly and also in indigenous communities as well. And I know for me, like what really sort of resonated with me is a lot of indigenous communities have historical trauma with infectious disease, especially here in the Americas, right? Yeah. With the history of colonization. And so that definitely was something like, I do not want to be a part of the legacy of colonization or sort of transmuting an infectious disease to communities. Like, I don't want to cause harm. So, and, just the uncertainty of the pandemic and seeing, looking at the data of like sort of the health impacts this pandemic is having on our communities, I think it's in my best interest to probably just stay home so that I don't cause any harm. Like, I don't want to contribute to any harm being caused around the world. So that is what sort of prompted me to stay put in Oakland.
Yeah, I think the proximity with which that you have with your medical health background certainly helps. Like, my mom is a medical professional as well. So, before the news breaks that we're low on PPE, right? My mom might say something like, well, we didn't get to wear this today. Or when she says, you know what, I think cases are going up again. And I'm like, Mom, I think you just, I think you're just being discouraged. I think you're just being a little pessimistic. But she sees it in the hospitals, right? Like, she sees whenever PPE inventory is low. She sees when cases are rising again. And so she usually is the first person to tell me that. And then, weeks later, Newsom will make some dry announcements and let us know. Right. And also, like, do you remember, like, I had a hospital stay. It just actually reminded me when you mentioned that, like, I had to go to the hospital. I think it was like April 2020, like fresh season 1. Oh yeah. Like, literally, like right and I thought I had COVID. And not that COVID is less severe these days, but at the onset, like, it was the worst thing that you could ever have. And it was literally life or death. You had a 50% chance, right, of surviving, depending on if you had health care, depending on if you were at a good hospital with proper staffing, et cetera. And so, like, I went to the hospital, stayed several hours there. It ended up just being a little stomach bug. But your girl really felt like I had a crazy fever. Like, I had a 102 fever. I was getting chills. Like, at that time, like, I had all the symptoms of COVID. I went to the emergency room, and, like, I don't even want to go there, but, like, the emergency room was, like, one of the scariest places I had ever been at that moment in time. At that time. In fact, I remember a man outside on a stretcher on the sidewalk adjacent to the hotel. And, like, I think he had been admitted, but perhaps didn't have anywhere to go. And he just looked lifeless. He just looked like, destitute. Like, there was no assistance for him. And I remember them just bringing in, like, ambulance trucks full of people. And I'm over there thinking I got COVID, and they end up telling me it's a stomach bug. And then I just felt so silly because I'm in the COVID wing. Like, the whole hospital was a COVID wing. Yeah, but at that time, at that time, I didn't know. And, and I was, like, in so much pain because of this stupid stomach bug. And I remember telling the nurse, like, hey, can I get some medicine? Like, I need some kind of pain relief. And she kind of got a little smart with me, but I don't blame her. And she's like, ma'am, the people next to you are dying. Just give us a second. Yeah. And I was so humbled in that moment. And just being so close to people who were dying in real time because of this thing. So going into this conversation about like why I didn't travel, I mean, I can't help but think that must play a part in it as well.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
I forgot you were in the hospital.
Yeah.
Glad you made it. Thank God.
Thank God.
Yes.
Glory to God. But
Absolutely.
it was crazy. And that was in Oakland. And I won't name the hospital. You know what I mean? They took care of me. And I'm sure they did the best that they could.
Yeah.
Right? But it was just scary to see up close and personal like that.
Yeah, and it, at the top of the pandemic, it was also a very novel disease where scientists and medical professionals did not really understand what they were dealing with, right? And to your point with your mom being a medical professional, they're on the front lines. They're seeing it every single day. That hits a little bit differently. Like I work in philanthropy now where I fund sort of community health centers across the Bay Area, and just really seeing the impact of this, you know, the virus on the health system and how overwhelmed the health system was and how underprepared they were to deal with just the high volume of people who were contracting the virus or may have thought they had contracted the virus, like in your case. It was very, very scary for me. So at that point it was like, okay, I love travel, but you know, the world isn't going anywhere.
Right. I'm gonna be back. Right.
We're gonna pause it for now.
Yeah.
But you, Anio, you hit green.
I hit green.
You hit green.
And I was gone.
Green light means, green means go.
Yeah. No, I did leave during the pandemic. I feel like I left during season 2, to be honest, because I didn't go anywhere until 2021. So 2020, I was in the house just like everybody else, but it was around September 2020 where I was like, I need to go. And just like you, I was conscious of like, okay, I'm an American, where can I go if I go somewhere? And like, is that, you know, me trying to go to a place and just, oh, okay, look at me, I'm an American, I can go wherever I want because I have this blue passport. Like, who cares about how y'all are doing with the virus? Like, I thought about that too, and just making sure, okay, if I leave somewhere, I'm not just going to travel. Like, I'm going somewhere to like just kind of be there for a bit. I want to go somewhere where there is a Black community, and the Black community says that this place is okay for us to go, and it's okay. Like, there's like COVID is minimal, and you know, the countries that were open at the time, you had to get tested to go, and you had to get tested to leave. So I figured, okay, like out of the 3 options that were available, you know, for me, Mexico is my favorite country. I'm Nigerian, but you know, so I might get some flames for that. But truly, like, you know, just the place where I found the most solace, I will say, is Mexico. And so around September, when things were just like, it was super hype and I was just done. I said, okay, I'm going to try to figure out how I can go to Mexico at this time. And so, it actually, the way it happened was, in my opinion, damn near, it was like divine almost. Like, I had an apartment in Oakland and I was on Telegraph. My place was on Airbnb for a little bit because I was going back and forth to my parents' house in San Jose during the pandemic. And my place was on Airbnb, and somebody reached out. This Black guy reached out to me, and he was like, hey, I'm looking for Black Airbnb hosts that I can stay with because I only want to support Black Airbnb hosts and I want to stay long term. And I was like, okay. And I was like, this is random, but all right. And at this time I was like still going back and forth between if I should go to Mexico, if it was safe, if it made sense. And then I debated it up until maybe November. So I genuinely considered it for a long time. But then in November, I had another friend who I went to brunch with, and she was like, hey, like, I'm going to Mexico. Like, I'm moving in January. And I was like, what? I want to go to Mexico. And she was like, I'm going. So if you want to go, like, I'm going to Playa del Carmen. And that's where I was considering going too. So I was like, oh, wait, this is perfect. And I was like, wait a minute, there's this guy that hit me up like a couple months ago who said he was open to staying in my place because I love my apartment. Elsa knows. I don't want to leave that place. Okay, it took me forever to find it. Y'all know how Oakland is with rent and finding apartments. Like, this was like a gem. So if I gave it up, it would have been really hard to find something else if I came back.
That's right.
So I was like, damn, but I don't want to give him my place. Let me hit up that guy. So I hit him up. It was like November, and he was like, yeah, I'm still interested. So he came over, we met. He's a really cool guy. And in December, I was like, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Mexico and I'm going to just be there. And I'm going to just.
And for the record, when Anayo says she thinks she's going to do something, and it involves travel, she's going to do it. It's a definite. It's definitive.
Okay. Well, yeah, I usually do go.
Yeah.
But this had to be a bit more planned and a bit more strategic and a bit more considered just because of everything that was going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, he decided that he was going to come in February and stay for 6 months at my place. And so January, I packed my stuff up. I moved back home to San Jose for like a month. And then in March of 2021, this year, I left to go to Playa del Carmen, Mexico, which is a Black haven, y'all. Let me tell you right now, it is a haven for Black people, okay? So many Black people are down there.
Yeah.
And even if there weren't, the local Mexican people that live there are so kind, so welcoming, so happy to see you, so like, you know, granted, they have some words they use that are terms of endearment that for a second, okay, when you first get there, you're like, did he just call me the N-word? But
see, we're not about to do that.
They'll call you like morena and like, you know, negrita. And I'm like, I know this. Like, I think they just call me the N-word. But no, it's like, it's a slight adjustment, but luckily, a lot of the Black people that are there, we call Playa del Carmen like kind of expat light because it's a very touristy city. It's a very small beach town. It's very easy to get acclimated and so many tourists are there. It's actually a town built for tourism. So like there's Tulum and there's Cancun and they built Playa del Carmen in the middle literally for tourists to kind of just help grow their economy. So I know that was another thing with Black people traveling was like, y'all are out here traveling. I know Mexicans are tired of y'all. Y'all going to Tulum. Y'all running it to the ground. They was here for us, y'all. They know like hospitality and tourism was their number one way of supporting their economy. So it actually really helped their country for us to be there and like buying from their businesses. Yeah. So yeah, I was in Mexico shouting and I was there from March till June. So not too long. I think March, April, May, June. Yeah. 3 to 4 months. And she was living her best life. I was living my best life.
Meanwhile, I'm on the plantation working. And I'm getting like WhatsApp updates from her. And I was like, oh, this is what we do. I was like, well, girl, nothing changed over here. Or,
right.
You know, America is still America.
Yeah.
And I'm glad and you had some, you know, nice wild stories, but we won't talk about that today.
Here she goes. She always got to try me. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I had a lot of fun. And I think it was funny because as soon as I got there, I met like a group of women who became like my community there, and people were just super welcoming. I think one thing that just like made me so happy to be there was just seeing how happy the Black people were there. Yeah. All the Black people they had left, they were there from Atlanta, they were there from DC, New York. A little bit of, there was like 1 or 2 of us from the Bay, but mostly like DC, Florida, Atlanta, New York. And they were so happy. Like these people were living, they had, you know, catering businesses, they had laundromats, the lavanderia, because in Mexico you gotta, you know, you take your laundry to the lavanderia, get your laundry done by somebody, then you go pick it up. So they were opening that. They had coffee shops, they had all kinds of things. You know, there was healers, yoga people, personal trainers, like everything.
It sounds like from what you had shared and from things that I've read online that Black people left their problems behind in America.
Literally.
Perhaps where our problems start, right where they started.
Yeah.
Right? Like we left our problems behind. And do you find that when you travel, you often leave your problems behind?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That definitely resonates. I feel like when you leave the U.S., I don't know, there's something about this.
It's heavy.
It's heavy.
It's heavy.
Like a lot of the expectations and a lot of stress and just, you know, like the work life, the culture here, the values here. It's just, it's really,
it's very stressful.
It's very stressful. And I think it weighs on us over time. And so I think just hearing you talk about like Playa, I'm just like, yes.
It's stressful here. Yeah. And like, I think that's also the draw to traveling is you can just kind of, I don't want to say it's escapism. Some people do travel for that escape factor, but there is a level of like, it's literally like when you leave the shores of the US, you feel like, like a weight lifted.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the huge draws of traveling. Period.
Absolutely. Yeah, that absolutely resonates. I feel like similarly, so once the vaccine came out and became available in the spring of 2021, I was like, bet I'm going to get this vaccine.
So you were pro-vaccine from the beginning?
From the beginning, yes. When I looked at
no doubts.
The pros and cons. Wait, all my family. It's so funny. So when I got the vaccine, everyone in my family, like, people had never called me, checking on me like, hey, are you good? Like 2 days after.
Yeah.
Right, because I was like, I'm gonna let these other people get it first, see how they fare.
Because it was controversial.
Yeah, it was experimental, pretty much. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that absolutely resonated. But I was like, you know what? When I look at the pros and cons, like, I want to hug my grandmother. Like, I want to hug my grandmother. I want to be able to like leave my house. Like, I want to be able to go. I want, you know what I mean? I want some level of normalcy. And if this is a promise towards that, then like, I'll take my risk.
Exactly.
That was my sort of like thought process. Yeah. So I got the vaccine pretty early on. I feel like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that's the black one. Shout out.
No,
that is the black vaccine. Okay?
Why is that the black vaccine?
No,
like
every
first off, because it's one shot.
Are we scared?
Second of all,
are we scared of needles? Is that like, are we scared of blood? Like, I'm like, why is every black person reaching for the Johnson & Johnson joint?
Child, one shot. And Johnson & Johnson, they've been making all of our, baby oils and whatnot. And then 3, Johnson & Johnson is the one that they had to like recall.
Yeah.
Right. It was on some ghetto shit. So
which was funny because like I got that when it first came out, and my thinking was, I was like, okay, Moderna, like they developed this vaccine in 9 months. Like, I don't know that I trust it. But I was like, Johnson & Johnson, they've had more time, you know what I mean, to like look at what Moderna was doing and to look at the technology and to come up with this vaccine. I'll bet on that one. Like, I'm gonna bet on that one. So that was my sort of thinking with getting vaccinated. Yeah. But I was very pro-vaccination. As soon as I got vaccinated, immediately the same day I booked a flight to Senegal.
Oh, hey!
I was like, I am
vaxxed and waxed and ready to travel. Yes,
I was so ready to go, and I was like, the first place I want to go is I have to touch down on the continent. Like, I really, really want to be in a place where, I walk into a market and like, the makeup started at my skin tone. Like, I just need to be around us. Like, I want to see black people not, on the beach. Like, I could go to the West Indies, but I want to see black people just on the beach, enjoying the beach, not working the beach, And so for me, like making the decision to go to West Africa was like rooted in me being like in just sort of self-preservation at that point. And like, I wanted to go I needed more restoration and like, just recovery from the year.
Girl,
I was like, how much wear and tear this pandemic is going to have on me?
Child, we going to see it in like
worn down and tired.
Decades.
I'm worn down and tired.
Yeah.
So how was your experience in Senegal? What was COVID like going on there? Were they impacted at all? Because I know certain African countries were like pro this vaccine or very like, God got us. We're not worried about COVID.
Or it didn't even hit some African countries and scientists were mad about it.
Right. No, it was so interesting because I feel like season 1 of the pandemic, like there was all this conversation of like, wow, when the pandemic, when the virus hit the continent of Africa, it's going to devastate African countries. I remember that. But what was really fascinating when I touched down in Senegal, it was required that I like got tested before going. So that gave me a level of sort of safety and security with going there. When I got there, like just driving from the airport to my hotel, I was really surprised to see how many people, I was like about a third of the people on the streets are wearing masks. And so it was interesting because the virus was not there. And I met up there, I met up with a doctor friend there and he had shared like, we get like maybe 1 or 2 cases a week coming into the hospital. It's not really a big thing here. And so I remember going on the beach and like having a mask on, and then like a guy just walked up to me and was like, we don't have that here. Like, you can take that mask off. Like that virus, right?
That here.
Enjoy, sister. Enjoy, sister.
Right.
He literally was like, COVID don't come to hot places. That's literally what he said to me. I was like, what?
If you buy the equator, it's going to kill it anyway. Right. Yeah, the UV rays.
And so that sort of emboldened me. It was really interesting because like I just took my mask off. I mean, when I went into public buildings and to restaurants, like I put a mask on. But for the most part, in terms of moving through Dakar and moving through Senegal, it felt pretty safe to not even have a mask because the COVID rates were so low at that time. I actually felt safer there than being here in California.
Yeah.
Wow.
So most of the country was not, or the city wasn't wearing masks, and like, okay.
I would say like a third. So people still had masks, but like out and about. And also the other thing about, I think, Dakar is that, and this may be true for a lot of other West African countries as well. People spend a lot more time outdoors. And so the virus, you know, is high transmission indoors. Like we had learned that later. And so I think the nature of life, how life is sort of structured there, so people spend a lot of time outdoors. And so as such, like the virus just, I guess it just hadn't at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I would love to talk about too, just, okay, so we know that, you know, travel was a bit controversial, like moving around during the pandemic, and it still kind of is, even though travel has been coming back and more people have moved. Like, Elsa, you've been traveling a lot more lately, and like, people have been moving and grooving. I guess, like, I would love to talk about just what it meant for a lot of Black people. This was their first time during the pandemic traveling. Like, they decided, like, okay, like, I'm going to go to Mexico, or I'm going to go to Africa, or I'm going to go wherever. Like, a lot of people actually, for the first time, like, moved abroad, got on a plane, went international, or moved abroad and just was like, I'm here. Like, I think for me, it was amazing to see that. And even with all the, you know, some people debate like if that was even right or not, but I think overall, just seeing that black people able to move and see the world and know that America / the US is not the end all be all was beautiful. And so I'm curious, like, y'all's thoughts on just, I guess, knowing that, you know, the US isn't the end for us and we can move to other places and we can see the world. And the pandemic kind of kickstarted that. Like, I guess, does this mean anything for like Black people as a whole? Are we going to see more Black people traveling? Like, do we want to, you know, encourage more of course we want to encourage more of us, but like, I guess, what does it mean for the community to be able to see that other side of the world?
Wow, that's such a powerful question.
Wow, Nayo.
I love that question.
I love it too. Let me try to answer that question. I think for me, like, and I think because, you know, I am Ethiopian and I always grew up with it, with the lens of Africa, of Ethiopia. And, you know, my parents are still very much Habesha, very much Ethiopian. They go back as often as they can. Yeah. So for me, I always felt like, you know, while I am a resident, or I am a citizen, I should say, like my citizenship is my birthplace is in America. I guess I've never really felt that this is my permanent place. Yeah. And that I am a daughter of Africa. You know what I mean? And any Black nation for that matter. So for me, I always feel like I am a global citizen and that I belong wherever it is that I want to belong. And, you know, my grandparents have a compound that I could be on. And I can live a shout out to the compound, you know, I could live, shout out to my grandparents and my family, so that there are places that I can go outside of my current geography. And I know that's also a privilege. Like, and I know that, you know, I have the mobility to travel, and I know not everybody does. Not everyone has that kind of equity like that. So, so for me, it was a little bit different. But I just kind of rejoiced in seeing Black people start to understand that, they are not bound here either. And that when they break the chain, so to speak, of that kind of thinking or framework, then they can truly, and we can truly collectively like emancipate ourselves. Like, this is not it for us. We do not have to be here. Right. You know, and whether that's Africa, whether that's in the West Indies, whether that, you know what I mean? Like, there are in places in South and Central America, there are places and spaces for us. So I think that will continue to be the theme going forward. And I hope that it is. That's my takeaway.
I love that.
Yeah, I think, for me, like, even like when I was in Mexico, one of the places I went to near Mexico City, it's called Teotihuacan. And it's where there's these Teotihuacan pyramids. The Mayans had built these pyramids, the Sun Pyramid and the Moon Pyramid, that, like, the way they built it is literally perfectly, the way it's built is perfectly I don't know how, positioned to see the sun at a certain angle and the moon in front of the moon pyramid at a certain angle. And the Mayans did this without, of course, you know, any technology or any modern technology anyway. They did it literally just by looking at the stars and the moon and the sun and like just eyeballing it pretty much. Yeah. And it was crazy because when I was there, like as I was on a tour and the tour guide was telling the story about the Mayans and how they built the pyramids. And it just made me think so much about like our ancestral history, and like, you know, from the pyramids to like our indigenous, like in Nigeria, like Yoruba tribes, and just the indigenous and African people who, you know, moved through life just looking at the sun, the moon, stars, plants, like, and using that to dictate how they live their lives. And I just was like, wow, like we're so connected in this world, but in the US, you get so used to everything being like, no, we're different. And we do not have any similarities in terms of how we were brought up, in terms of where we came from. Our ancestors are not the same. But then when you start to travel, you start to realize like, wow, like, wait a minute, that's kind of like what I heard when I was in Thailand. And that's kind of like what I heard growing up from my grandma about like how her grandparents did things, or her great grandparents did things. And so I think for me, like, it makes you learn about the interconnectedness of humanity. Not to be like all woo woo, but like it really does make you feel like, wow. And then two, kind of on another topic, but I know you were talking about not wanting to feel like you were colonizing a place by going there, and like there's this disease and like bringing it to a place. And that was something that came up for us in Mexico a lot, is like, are we gentrifying Mexico by living here and enjoying our lives and being able to, you know, pay for things without suffering, or like go places without worrying about people staring at us or facing discrimination? And it was a huge conversation, but ultimately it's like, we should not feel guilty for being able to, we should not feel guilty for not feeling oppression or not feel oppressed. Like, we shouldn't feel guilty if we end up in a place that's not oppressing us, and like we're able to
where we're thriving.
Where we're thriving. Like, why do we feel guilty as Black people? Because we found a place that allows us to thrive. Like that was what I learned in Mexico. Like, wow, I do feel like I'm thriving here, but why do I feel guilty about it? And it's because we come from a country where suffering is kind of the natural mode. So when you are not suffering, it's like, damn,
do I deserve this?
Do I deserve it?
Am I doing something wrong?
Exactly. Like, should I go back to with my people who are suffering? Like, you know, there's a lot of questions there. But yeah, that's, I guess for me, like the beauty of traveling within this Panasonic has been, but also in general, Black people traveling. Like, I think that's something we can learn by seeing the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the like sort of ingenuity. You talked about the Mayans and their contributions, and just like the contributions of different, you know, communities around the world, like different countries, how that's often, it's not talked about enough, right?
Especially here in the U.S.
Especially here in the U.S. I feel like the education that like Americans get about the rest of the world is so minimal. It's really unfortunate, right?
It's so partial.
It's so partial.
I love that word, partial. Right? It's partial.
It's partial service, child.
Yeah, we love partial.
Yeah, and so it is. I agree. I think it has been very inspiring to see more Black people move freely to explore and see the world.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah,
and I think we'll continue to travel, as I mentioned before, but I want to hear some tips that you have for people working in a 9-to-5 or not working a 9-to-5, maybe a 5 to 9 or not working at all. Like, what are your tips on how we balance that and get to travel? I'd like to know.
Yes. I think the first step is like, you know, making the decision to like, I'm going to do this. I feel like work culture here, like work culture, productivity culture tells us that we need to be grinding ourselves to death. And to your point, like if you're not suffering or if you're enjoying life, there's this feeling of like, guilt. Guilt. Yeah. There's some guilt or shame around that. And I think that that's wrong. So sort of unlearning that. And then as it relates to traveling, I think prioritizing it and making it like, at least for me, that's the first step for me has been really claiming that like travel is a part of my self-care routine, and I'm going to leave the country at least, X number of times this year, and I'm going to communicate that to my work, or I'm going to structure my life in such a way that allows me that freedom. So that's something that's been really important to me. And then on the sort of budget piece, like there's a lot of privilege in travel as well. I know in other countries, like travel is a rite of passage, but in the U.S., it's not. It's really about privilege and who have access and who don't. And, we live in the Bay. It ain't cheap here, right?
No,
and
not.
So I think another thing is just really being mindful of flight deals, and like, there's ways to travel on a budget. There's ways to go out and, to see the world where you're not, breaking the bank. And so I think that's another, just really important point I think I want to stress to sort of, other Black folks and people of color, is that it's absolutely possible to go out and to see the world. The first step is really, making time for it, prioritizing it, trying to restructure your life if you have the ability to do that, or saving up and planning for it.
Yeah.
Do you use Scott's cheap flights?
Yes.
Okay. Y'all get on Scott's cheap flights.
Anayo,
deal.
I have never heard of Scott's before until Anayo started sending them to my Gmail.
I'm
and she's
good
like, wait,
for sending them a flight deal.
Right, she's like, didn't you say you wanted to go here a couple weeks ago? Well, here you go. And I was like, damn, Anayo's pushing me to travel. Like, and when you see those flight prices, when you see those deals, you're like, wow, I might really fly to like Timbuktu. Right. You know what I mean? For $30. And I might actually have to do it. It's a lot more approachable that way.
It's very doable on the budget thing. Yeah. Like I will recommend Scott's cheap flights. Would you say the flight deal?
The flight deal.
Airfare Watchdog. Get you on those lists, and they will send you deals where you're like, wait a minute, I can go to Europe, I can go to Africa, I could go to Asia for $200. I'm going to Tokyo for $200 in February, y'all.
Are you? Yes. You heard it here first.
Scott's cheap flights.
You heard it here first. I didn't even get this information. I'm learning with the people.
Yes. Okay. So it's possible, y'all. But yes, those are great tips.
I love that for you.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. And do you recommend? Is there like a starter pack? Like, let's say people who might have a fear of flying, let's say people who've maybe never left their city or their state before, do you recommend that they stick to domestic travel first and then build, or do you say no, the hell with it, leave the country?
I say leave the country. Yeah. Like I think that there are places to go that are more like where the sort of tourist infrastructure is pretty built up, and so it's easy to move in those countries and navigate if you don't speak the language, because sometimes that's the barrier. Like I don't speak the language, I don't speak Spanish, or I'm not really comfortable sort of traveling. I would say like really being thoughtful about picking places where, you think you'd be safe. So looking at sort of safety.
Safety is key.
Safety is key, especially for women traveling. That's really, really important, right? I'd say go abroad. Like, and if you make your first trip to the continent, like I highly recommend
Africa. Okay. Yes. So then let's end on this. Like, let's all share maybe like our 3 favorite countries that we've ever visited.
Okay.
Who want to go? Oh,
yes. Start us off.
Okay. In no particular order. I would definitely say Jamaica.
Yes.
Greece.
Oh, yes.
You were there with me.
I was. That one. I was also there with her in Jamaica.
Yeah.
I love this. I love it.
Yes, you were. And I gotta say Ethiopia.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. I love those options. For me, I would say Senegal, South Africa.
Okay.
And Kenya.
Oh, I want to go to Kenya so bad.
I do want to go to Nairobi.
Nairobi is
Shout
amazing.
out to my East Africans.
Yes, East Africa. Like people sleep on East Africa.
Thank you.
Like for real.
Just because we don't got Afro beats, okay? Just because we don't got Afro beats in East Africa, but we do, because Kenya actually has a crazy like music scene. Anyway, we're not gonna get into it. That's a topic for another time.
Episode.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what are yours?
Mexico for sure. I want to say Italy just because I have a tie there.
Yeah,
I used to live there. And then Nigeria for sure.
So there you go. We just gave y'all like 9 solid countries to investigate, to research, and thank y'all for sharing those
Oh,
flight deal sites.
Flight hacks.
Flight hacks,
yes,
for sure.
Y'all got to see the world. There's so much more to it than just the U.S. They gonna tell you that it's only the U.S. We didn't talk about this, but I don't know if y'all noticed, like the global sentiment around U.S. culture has been dwindling. People have become more woke to like how trash we are. So shout out to that. But yes, Anitra, thank you for being on.
Yes.
It's been so great.
Come back and see us.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Follow your travels online at Don't Trip Travel. Yes.
For sure. All right, y'all. Yes. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yes.
And don't forget to stay woke.